She didn't just marry a poor man. She married a mystery no one in that room was ready to understand. The whisper slipped between crystal glasses and polished smiles, soft but sharp enough to linger in the air like a quiet accusation. 3 executives leaned closer, their voices low, controlled but laced with disbelief. "That's him," one muttered. "That's Daniel Hayes?" another replied, barely hiding a scoff. "Looks like he walked in off a construction site." A third voice followed, colder. "Or like he doesn't belong here at all." The ballroom shimmered under warm golden light, chandeliers casting reflections across marble floors so pristine they seemed untouched by time. Every detail spoke of wealth, precision, control. And yet, standing at the edge of it all, Daniel Hayes didn't try to match it. His suit was clean but worn at the edges, the kind of fabric that had seen years, not seasons. His shoes, polished but aged, carried quiet miles no one in that room cared to imagine. He stood still, hands loosely folded, eyes calm, as if the weight of judgment pressing against him simply passed through without resistance. No reaction. No defense. Just presence. At the center of the room, Charlotte Bennett, CEO visionary, the woman who built an empire before turning 40, stood radiant in a gown that reflected every ounce of her power. Her posture was flawless, her gaze sharp, her expression unreadable. People admired her, feared her, followed her. But tonight they questioned her. Not out loud. Not directly. Just enough to let the doubt settle like dust across every conversation. Because power, when it chooses something unexpected, makes people uncomfortable. And Charlotte had chosen him. The ceremony had been brief, efficient, almost clinical in its precision. Vows spoken, rings exchanged, applause given. But beneath the elegance, something didn't align. Not for them. Not for the ones watching. Because this wasn't the story they expected. A woman like Charlotte didn't marry a man like Daniel. Not without a reason. Not without a hidden angle. And yet there he was. Quiet. Unshaken. As if the noise around him had already been measured and dismissed. A server passed by offering champagne. Daniel declined with a polite nod. Charlotte accepted hers without hesitation, lifting the glass slightly as another group approached to congratulate her. Their smiles were wide, but their eyes flicked, just briefly, toward Daniel, then away again. Measuring. Judging. Dismissing. The music swelled gently in the background, something classical, controlled, composed. But underneath it, another rhythm pulsed. One made of assumptions. Of hierarchy. Of invisible lines being drawn and quietly enforced. And Daniel stood on the wrong side of all of them. Or so they thought. Because what no one in that room understood, not the executives, not the investors, not even Charlotte herself in that moment, was that silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's history. And sometimes, it's power waiting for the right moment to speak. And when it does, it doesn't raise its voice. It simply changes the room. If you're enjoying this story, take a second to subscribe. It really helps the channel. Now let's go on. The laughter never came loud enough to be called cruel, but it lingered just beneath the surface, hidden in tightened smiles and half-turned shoulders as Daniel moved through the room like someone who had learned long ago that being overlooked was often the safest place to stand. "You should say something," one executive murmured to Charlotte as she accepted another round of congratulations, his voice smooth but probing. "People are curious." She did not look at him. "People are always curious," she replied evenly. "It is not my job to satisfy them." Her tone ended the conversation but not the questions. Across the room, Daniel paused near a tall window overlooking the city skyline, the light stretching for miles like a quiet reminder of everything this world valued. He rested one hand lightly on the back of a chair, not claiming space, not retreating from it either. Just present. A young analyst approached, hesitant but emboldened by the safety of numbers. "So," he began, forcing a polite smile, "what do you do, Daniel?" The question hung there, simple on the surface, loaded underneath. Daniel met his eyes, calm and steady. "I work," he said. The analyst blinked, waiting for more. None came. "Right," the young man nodded awkwardly. "Of course." Two more joined, their curiosity less restrained. "Construction," one guessed. "Something like that," another added. Daniel's gaze did not shift. "Something like that," he repeated quietly. They exchanged glances, satisfied enough to file him away into a category that made sense to them. It was easier that way. Across the ballroom, Charlotte watched the interaction without appearing to. Her expression remained composed, but there was a subtle tension in the way she held her glass, as if she were measuring something she could not quite define. Control had always been her strength. Numbers, outcomes, people. Everything had a place. Everything made sense. Except this. Except him. The music softened as a string quartet transitioned into a slower piece, the kind that filled space without demanding attention. Conversations shifted. Deals were hinted at. Futures were quietly negotiated. And still, Daniel did not insert himself into any of it. He listened when spoken to. He answered when asked. He offered nothing more than what was necessary. Not defensive. Not eager. Just contained. "You are not even trying," Charlotte said suddenly, her voice low as she stepped beside him without warning. Daniel turned slightly, acknowledging her presence with a small nod. "Trying what?" he asked. "To belong here," she replied, her eyes searching his face for something she could define. "That depends," he said after a brief pause, "on whether belonging is something that needs to be proven." Charlotte studied him, the noise of the room fading just slightly as his words settled. "Everything in this room is earned," she said, almost instinctively. Daniel's gaze drifted toward the skyline again, the reflection of city lights catching faintly in his eyes. "Or assumed," he answered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was deliberate, measured, and somewhere within it, a question formed that Charlotte had not expected to ask herself. Not about him, but about everything she thought she understood. And for the first time that night, the room did not feel entirely under her control. The night stretched on, but something subtle had shifted, not loud enough to be named, yet present in the way conversations paused a second too long when Daniel passed by, in the way a few more eyes lingered instead of dismissing him entirely, as if curiosity had begun to replace certainty. "You always this quiet?" a senior partner asked, stepping into Daniel's space with a glass of bourbon in hand, his tone casual but edged with challenge. Daniel looked at him, not defensive, not impressed. "Only when it matters," he replied. The man smirked, swirling his drink. "And does this matter?" Daniel glanced around the room, the laughter, the deals, the polished masks. "Not as much as people think," he said calmly. A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, just unexpected, like a rhythm slightly offbeat. The partner let out a short laugh, unsure whether he had been dismissed or understood. "You are an interesting man," he said, though it sounded more like a question than a conclusion. Across the room, Charlotte found herself watching again, not out of obligation, but something quieter, something she had not planned for. She was used to reading people quickly, categorizing them, understanding their value within seconds. It was how she built everything she had. But Daniel did not fit. He did not signal ambition. He did not display insecurity. He did not ask for anything. And that absence of need unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. "You are thinking too much," a board member whispered beside her. Charlotte did not turn. "I always do." "About him," the man pressed lightly. Charlotte's eyes narrowed just slightly. "About patterns," she corrected. "And what breaks them?" Meanwhile, near the edge of the room, Daniel checked his watch, a simple piece, worn leather strap. Nothing that belonged in a place like this, yet it suited him perfectly. A message lit up briefly on the screen. He read it, and for the first time that evening something changed. Not in posture, not in expression, just a slight softening around his eyes. He typed a short reply, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Family?" A quiet voice asked. It was the young analyst again, more cautious now. Daniel nodded once. "My daughter." The analyst hesitated, then asked, "How old?" 9, Daniel said. "She likes numbers," he added after a brief pause, almost to himself. The analyst smiled, this time without calculation. "That is a good age." Daniel returned a small nod, and for a moment the room felt different, less like a stage, more like a place where something real could exist. But reality has a way of testing itself. At the far end of the ballroom, a group had gathered around a large digital display, voices rising slightly, tension threading through the polished atmosphere. "That is not right," someone said. "The numbers do not align." Another voice followed, sharper. "We cannot present this tomorrow if the projections are off." Charlotte's attention snapped instantly, her focus shifting with practiced precision. She moved toward the group, her presence alone enough to quiet the rising concern. "Explain," she said, her tone controlled, firm. A senior analyst stepped forward, visibly uneasy. "There is a discrepancy in the forecast model," he said. "We have checked twice, and something is not holding." Charlotte's gaze sharpened. "Then check again." "We did," he replied more quietly now. "3 times. A pause settled, heavier than before. Numbers did not fail her. Systems did not slip. Not under her watch. And yet, the tension in the room said otherwise. From a distance, Daniel observed, not stepping in, not reacting, just watching as the room began to tilt, ever so slightly, away from certainty and toward something far less comfortable. Doubt. And in that quiet shift, something else emerged, something no one had planned for, something that did not belong to titles or power. The moment before truth begins to surface. "Run it again," Charlotte said, her voice low but firm, cutting cleanly through the rising tension as the group around the display shifted uneasily, fingers tapping against tablets, eyes scanning lines of data that refused to cooperate. "We already have," the senior analyst replied, this time without the earlier confidence, his tone thinner now, strained. "The model keeps drifting after the 3rd layer. It corrects, then breaks again." Another voice joined in, sharper. "If this is wrong, the entire projection collapses. We cannot present this to the board tomorrow." The words hung heavier than before. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. Around them, conversation slowed, attention pulling toward the disturbance like a tide responding to gravity. The music continued, soft and elegant, but it no longer defined the room. Uncertainty did. Charlotte stepped closer to the screen, her gaze narrowing as she absorbed the numbers, the patterns, the slight misalignment that should not have existed. Her mind moved quickly, methodically, searching for error, for oversight, for anything that would restore control. "Where is the variance originating?" she asked. "We traced it to the core assumptions," the analyst answered. "But they are locked. No one changed them." A pause. Not confusion. Not yet. Just resistance. Charlotte exhaled slowly, steadying the moment. "Then something was built incorrectly from the beginning," she said. The statement was precise, but it carried weight. Because in her world, foundations did not fail. Not hers. Not without reason. At the edge of the group, Daniel stood just outside the circle, unnoticed at first, his presence quiet enough to be ignored, yet close enough to see everything clearly. He did not interrupt. He did not step forward. He simply observed the way he had all night, measuring not the numbers themselves, but the way people responded to them. "It is a rounding issue," one analyst suggested quickly. "No," another countered. "The deviation is too consistent." "Then it is a scaling error." "We checked that." "Then what is it?" The questions began to stack, faster now, less controlled, each answer dissolving before it could settle. Charlotte remained still, her focus unwavering, but something beneath it had shifted. Not doubt in the data, doubt in the process, and that was far more dangerous. "Show me the base layer," she said. The screen adjusted, lines collapsing into simpler structures, cleaner, more exposed. Silence followed, longer this time, as the group leaned in, searching for clarity in what should have been obvious. Daniel's gaze moved across the display once, slow, deliberate, not scanning, not guessing, just recognizing. A pattern. A choice. A flaw that was not random, but intentional in its design. He stepped forward, just one step, enough to enter the edge of their attention. A few heads turned, surprised, some irritated. "We are handling this," the senior analyst said quickly, a polite barrier disguised as professionalism. Daniel nodded slightly. "I can see that," he replied. His tone was calm, not challenging, not submissive. Just factual. Charlotte glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in dismissal, but in calculation. "Do you have something to add?" she asked. The room quieted, not out of respect but curiosity, the kind that comes when someone unexpected speaks at the wrong time. Daniel looked at the screen again, then back at her. Only a question, he said. A brief pause. Why is your baseline compensating for a variable that no longer exists? The words landed softly, but they did not fade. They settled. And for a moment no one spoke. Not because they did not hear him, but because they did. The question did not echo, it settled, quiet and precise, like something that had been waiting to be noticed rather than announced. What do you mean? The senior analyst asked, his tone tightening, not aggressive but guarded now, as if the ground beneath his certainty had shifted just enough to be felt. Daniel did not rush to answer. He stepped closer to the screen, his movements unhurried, his presence still composed in a way that contrasted sharply with the growing tension around him. Your baseline model, he said, gesturing lightly toward the data, was designed to stabilize fluctuations from a legacy variable. He paused, letting the words land without force. But that variable was removed 2 quarters ago. A few brows furrowed. One analyst leaned in, scrolling quickly through layers of archived inputs. That cannot be right, he muttered. We updated everything. Daniel's gaze remained steady. You updated the outputs, he said. Not the compensation logic beneath them. Silence. Not complete, not yet, but enough to slow the room. Fingers hovered above screens instead of moving. I stopped scanning and started looking. Charlotte did not speak immediately. Her focus sharpened not on Daniel, but on the structure he had pointed to, her mind recalibrating, tracing the logic backward instead of forward. Pull the compensation layer, she said finally, her voice quieter now, more precise. The analyst hesitated for half a second, then complied. The screen shifted again, deeper this time, exposing the underlying architecture, the part most people never questioned because it had always been there. There, Daniel said softly, not pointing, not needing to. It is still adjusting for a factor that no longer exists. The room leaned in. Someone exhaled under their breath. That would create a consistent drift, another analyst said slowly, the realization forming in real time. It would correct, then break again. Exactly, Daniel replied. No triumph. No emphasis. Just confirmation. The senior partner who had spoken earlier stepped forward, his expression no longer dismissive. How did we miss that? He asked, not to Daniel but to the room, to himself. Charlotte's eyes remained on the display, but something in her posture shifted, not weakened, not uncertain, just recalibrated. Because we assumed the foundation was stable, she said. Her voice carried, not loud but grounded. And we stopped questioning it. Another silence followed, heavier than before, but different now. Not confusion. Recognition. The analyst began making adjustments, removing the outdated compensation, recalculating the projections in real time. The numbers shifted, aligned, stabilized. Clean. Coherent. The tension that had filled the space moments ago did not disappear, but it transformed, settling into something quieter, something closer to respect. Daniel stepped back, returning to the edge of the group as naturally as he had entered it. No claim. No ownership. Just space. You should have said something earlier, the senior analyst remarked, not accusing but almost puzzled. Daniel met his gaze briefly. No one asked earlier, he said. The simplicity of the answer lingered longer than expected. Charlotte finally turned to him fully, her expression no longer guarded in the same way, but not open either. Something in between. Something new. You saw that from a glance? She asked. Daniel considered the question for a moment. Not from a glance, he said. From experience. A pause. The room listened, even those who pretended not to. Charlotte studied him, not as a husband, not as a stranger, but as a variable she had not accounted for. And what kind of experience teaches you to see something like that? She asked quietly. Daniel's gaze did not shift, did not soften, did not harden. It remained steady, grounded in something deeper than the moment. The kind you do not talk about, he said. And this time the silence that followed was not filled with doubt. It was filled with something far more powerful. Respect beginning to take shape. No one applauded, no one announced what had just happened, but the room felt it, a quiet recalibration that did not need words to be understood as conversations resumed, softer now, more measured, as if something invisible had shifted beneath the surface of power and certainty. Fix the full model before morning, Charlotte said, her voice steady, reclaiming control not through force but clarity. And document every assumption this time. Yes, ma'am, the analyst replied quickly, his earlier confidence replaced with something more careful, more aware. Screens dimmed, glasses were set down, and the crowd slowly dispersed into smaller circles, each carrying a piece of what they had just witnessed, though none spoke of it directly. Daniel had already stepped away, back toward the edge of the room where the light softened and expectations loosened, as if nothing had happened, as if he had not just corrected a flaw that could have cost millions. You do that often? A voice asked behind him. He turned slightly to see Charlotte standing there again. No glass in her hand this time, no audience, just her. Do what? He asked. Step into something that is not yours, she replied, her tone not accusing, not approving, just searching. Daniel considered her words, then glanced briefly toward the now quiet display across the room. It looked like it was becoming mine, he said simply. Charlotte held his gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment longer than before. You made them look careless, she said. No, Daniel answered gently. They were not careless. A pause. They were certain. The distinction lingered, subtle but sharp, and Charlotte felt it, not as a challenge but as a mirror. Certainty built this company, she said, almost instinctively. Daniel nodded once. And questioning keeps it standing, he replied. The space between them grew quieter, not awkward, not tense, just honest in a way that neither of them had expected when the night began. Across the room, a pair of executives spoke in hushed tones, their earlier confidence softened. Who is he? One asked. I do not know, the other admitted. But that was not luck. Their voices faded into the background, but the question did not. Charlotte exhaled slowly, her posture shifting ever so slightly, not from weakness but from awareness. You did not have to say anything, she said, her voice lower now. Daniel looked at her, calm as ever. Neither did they, he replied. Another pause. This one deeper. Why did you? She asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. His gaze moved briefly to the window, the city still glowing beyond the glass, steady, indifferent to the small shifts happening inside this room. Because silence is not always the right kind of strength, he said finally. Charlotte absorbed that, not arguing, not agreeing, just letting it settle where it needed to. For a moment she looked at him not as a decision she had made, not as a risk to manage, but as something she had not yet understood. You are not what they think you are, she said quietly. Daniel's expression did not change, but something in his eyes reflected a truth he had long accepted. They are not wrong, he said. Charlotte's brows drew together slightly. Then what are they missing? She asked. Daniel met her gaze fully, his voice calm, grounded, carrying no need to impress, no need to defend. The part that does not need to be seen, he said. And for the first time that night, Charlotte realized that whatever she had married, it was not something that fit into her world easily. It was something that could change it without trying. The room did not return to what it was before, not completely, not after something unspoken had taken root in the space between perception and truth. As conversations resumed with a different tone, less certain, more observant, as if every word now carried the quiet weight of reconsideration. Run the revised projections by 6 in the morning, Charlotte said to her team, her voice composed but sharper now, each instruction precise, controlled, familiar. I want 0 assumptions left unchecked. Understood, came the replies, faster this time, more attentive, as if the margin for error had narrowed without warning. Daniel stood near the far side of the room again, not withdrawn, not engaged, simply existing within the edges of a world that had begun to notice him whether it intended to or not. A senior investor approached, slower than before, his posture measured, no longer dismissive. Daniel, he said, testing the name as if it held more meaning now. That was unexpected. Daniel met his gaze briefly. Most things are, he replied. The man gave a small nod, studying him with a different kind of interest, one not rooted in judgment but in quiet evaluation. You have a background in finance? He asked. Daniel shook his head once. Not exactly. Engineering. Something like that. The pattern repeated, but this time it landed differently. Not evasive. Deliberate. Across the room Charlotte watched again, but there was no distance in her attention now, Only focus, as if each answer Daniel gave revealed less about what he was and more about what he chose not to be. You are still trying to categorize him, a voice said beside her. It was the same board member from earlier. Charlotte did not look away from Daniel. That is how understanding begins, she replied. Or how it fails, the man said quietly. She did not respond. Instead, she moved, crossing the room with intention, the subtle shift in energy following her like a current. Conversations lowered as she passed, attention bending instinctively toward her presence. When she reached Daniel, she did not speak immediately. She simply stood there, close enough that the distance between them no longer felt like observation but engagement. You left something out, she said finally. Daniel turned slightly, his expression calm. Did I? Yes, she said. Experience like that does not come from nowhere. A brief silence followed, one that did not demand an answer, but made space for one. Daniel considered her words, then glanced around the room, the polished floors, the tailored suits, the quiet recalibration still settling into every corner. It comes from building things that people use without knowing who built them, he said. Charlotte's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, but in recognition of something just beyond reach. And you built what exactly? She asked. Daniel looked back at her, steady, grounded, unhurried. Foundations, he said. The word was simple, but it carried more weight than the room could immediately process. Nearby, two analysts exchanged a glance, their earlier certainty replaced with something more cautious. Foundations of what? One whispered. Systems, the other guessed. Platforms. Charlotte did not echo their questions. She held Daniel's gaze, searching for the line between humility and truth. You are speaking in generalities, she said. Daniel nodded slightly. Because specifics change, he replied. Principles do not. Another pause. This one deeper, quieter, as if the room itself was listening, waiting for something more concrete, something that could be measured, defined, controlled. But Daniel offered none of that. Instead, he stepped back half a pace, not retreating, just returning to the space he had chosen from the beginning. You do not need to understand it tonight, he said gently. Charlotte's expression tightened just slightly, not in frustration, but in the unfamiliar feeling of not being the one with answers. And when do I? She asked. Daniel's gaze softened just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be explained. When it matters, he said. And for the second time that night, the room did not fall silent because someone demanded it. It fell silent because something true had just been said, and no one was quite ready to respond. The night should have ended there, with quiet corrections and careful conversations fading into polished goodbyes, but something deeper had already been set in motion, something that did not belong to the schedule or the structure of the event, something that waited for the right moment to surface. We need confirmation before sunrise, one of the senior executives said urgently, stepping toward Charlotte with a tablet in hand, his voice low but tight. The board is asking questions already. They want assurance that the system will hold under live conditions. Charlotte took the tablet, her eyes scanning the incoming messages, each one sharper than the last, each one carrying the weight of expectation she had built her entire career on. It will hold, she said, though this time, the certainty carried a trace of something new, not doubt but awareness. Run the simulation again with the corrected baseline, she added. Full load, no shortcuts. We tried, the executive replied, swallowing slightly. It is still unstable under peak stress. The words landed heavier than anything before. Around them the room tightened again, not with confusion but pressure, the kind that exposes whether something is truly solid or only appears to be. Charlotte's posture remained composed, but her mind moved faster now, recalculating, searching for what had been missed, what still did not align. Show me, she said. The screen came alive once more. Numbers flowing, models expanding. The system pushed beyond normal limits, into the kind of strain it was meant to survive. And then it happened again. Fracture. Not obvious, not catastrophic, but there. A hesitation in the flow. A break in the rhythm. It is failing under recursion, the analyst said quietly. The correction fixed the surface, but the deeper structure still loops. Silence followed, sharper this time, cutting through the room like a realization no one wanted to voice. Charlotte's gaze hardened, not in anger but in focus, the kind that stripped away everything unnecessary until only truth remained. Why? She asked. No one answered immediately. Not because they did not want to, but because they did not know. At the edge of the room, Daniel had not moved far, but his attention had never left the system. He watched the simulation unfold, not reacting, not interrupting, just observing the pattern beneath the pattern. The flaw was no longer hidden. It was structural. Intentional once, outdated now. He stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, without waiting to be invited. A few heads turned, but no one stopped him. Not now. It is not failing, he said, his voice calm, steady, cutting through the noise without raising volume. The room still, drawn not by authority but by clarity. It is protecting itself. The words shifted something immediately. Charlotte looked at him, her focus locking in place. Explain, she said. Daniel gestured lightly toward the simulation. The system was designed to prevent overload by cycling excess demand back into its own structure, he said. A containment loop. The analysts exchanged glances, recognition beginning to surface. That was removed, one of them said quickly. We replaced it with linear scaling. Daniel shook his head once. You replaced the visible mechanism, he said. Not the logic behind it. A pause. Then realization. So under stress, the analyst began. It reverts, Daniel finished, because it does not trust the new structure yet. Silence. Absolute silence. The kind that does not come from confusion, but from truth landing exactly where it should. Charlotte's eyes did not leave him. How do you know that? She asked, her voice quieter now, but carrying more weight than before. Daniel met her gaze, not stepping back, not stepping forward, just standing in the space he had claimed without force. Because I wrote that logic, he said. And this time the room did not just listen. It stopped. No one moved, no one spoke, and for a moment, even the soft hum of the system seemed to fade beneath the weight of what had just been said as Daniel stood there without posture, without performance, without any sign that he had just shifted the entire room with a single sentence. You wrote it? The senior analyst asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier certainty, as if speaking too loudly might break something fragile forming in the air. Daniel gave a small nod, not proud, not reluctant, just acknowledging a fact that had never needed to be announced until now. Charlotte's eyes held his, steady but searching, not for validation but for truth. That architecture was developed over a decade ago, she said slowly. It was part of a private framework acquired through a series of mergers. No one has claimed authorship. Daniel's gaze did not shift. That makes sense, he replied. I was not part of the acquisition. A subtle ripple moved through the room, not loud, not chaotic, but undeniable. As pieces began to align in minds that had built careers on understanding systems, not people. Then why walk away? The senior partner asked, stepping closer now, not with authority, but with genuine curiosity. If you built something this foundational, why disappear? Daniel looked at him briefly, then past him, toward the window where the city still stretched wide and indifferent, light steady, unmoved by the quiet shift inside this room. Because not everything that works needs to be owned, he said. The answer did not explain everything, but it explained enough. Charlotte inhaled slowly, her posture changing in a way only those who knew her well might notice, not weaker, not uncertain, but more grounded, as if she had just encountered something that did not need her to define it in order to exist. Can you fix it? She asked. No title. No distance. Just a question. Daniel looked back at the screen, the looping simulation, the system trying to protect itself from a structure it no longer fully trusted. It is not broken, he said. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. A pause. It just needs to trust the new foundation. The analysts leaned in, listening now without resistance, without assumption. How? One of them asked. Daniel stepped forward once more, not to take over but to guide. You do not remove the loop, he said. You teach it when to let go. He pointed lightly to a segment of the model, a small adjustment, almost invisible compared to the scale of the system. You create a threshold, a condition where the system recognizes stability before it releases. Control. Fingers moved quickly now, not in panic but in alignment, implementing what he described, testing, recalculating. The numbers shifted again, but this time they held. No drift. No fracture. Just flow. Clean, stable, complete. Silence followed, but it was different now, not heavy, not tense, but full, like a room that had just witnessed something it would not forget. Charlotte did not look at the screen. She looked at him. "You did not need any of this," she said quietly, her voice carrying something softer than authority. Daniel met her gaze, calm as ever. "I did not do it for this," he replied. Another pause, deeper than the rest. "Then why?" she asked. Daniel's expression did not change, but something in his presence answered before his words did. "Because when something matters," he said gently, "you do not let it fail just to prove a point." The room remained still, but not frozen, not stunned, just aware, as if every assumption made earlier in the night had quietly stepped aside to make room for something more honest. Charlotte held his gaze a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not as a CEO, not as a decision-maker, but as someone who had just seen clearly for the first time. And Daniel, just as quietly, stepped back into the edges of the room again, exactly where he had begun, unchanged, unclaimed, but no longer unseen. In a world driven by power and perception, a quiet single father enters a life he was never expected to belong to, standing beside a powerful female CEO whose decisions shape industries but not always truth. This story unfolds through subtle tension, silent judgment, and the unexpected strength of character, making it one of those touching stories that reveal how dignity speaks louder than status. As doubt rises and a hidden system begins to fail, the man no one respected becomes the one who understands everything, delivering one of the most powerful turning points found in touching stories. With calm precision and lived experience, he restores balance not for recognition but because it is right, reminding us why touching stories resonate deeply with audiences seeking meaning beyond wealth. The female CEO begins to see beyond appearances, discovering that real strength often hides in silence, a theme central to the most unforgettable touching stories. In the end, respect is not demanded but earned quietly, proving once more why touching stories leave a lasting impact on the human heart. If you felt something from this story, you can subscribe for more. There's a lot more coming.